It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher.
My personality is I want to win badly. I want to win more Lombardis for Philadelphia and our fans. We got the greatest fans around, and I will do everything possible.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
And Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, which drops tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., the very latest, from Geoff Mosher and Adam Kaplan. Right now, Mosher's in the house, and he is powered by Dr. Lyle M. Back for everything from skincare to cosmetic surgery. Go to ilovelylback.com or call 856-MAKEOVER for Dr. Lyle M. Back, proud sponsor of Football at 4. You have a very young look today, Moshe. Did you shave? Did you do something different?
No, it's the Carson Wentz trade is over, and my hair is not as white as it was last week. And
what are you coloring your hair? Are you using some sort of color?
No, I'm just kidding. I went out for a little run today. I had like a minute to breathe, so I guess the youthful glow is coming back to me.
Okay, I'll take that. So the journey is over. The course, the trade is in the books. I want to start by asking you this. We know that the Eagles are so far over the cap. And before we get into some potential ways to fix that, would that to you preclude them from signing anybody? Like, can they not make any moves? And like, if you bring a guy in, how does that affect your cap situation? Would you have to try to figure out even more ways to untangle your web if you were to bring a player in?
Well, yeah, obviously it depends on that player. I mean, they're not just going to get to a point, Mike, where they're right at the cap. They're cap compliant. Of course, you need to be underneath the cap just to be able to sign rookies. And you need to be able to have some flexibility for contract extensions. So they're going to have to make – this is why I've talked about when people say, oh, how he gets cap compliant, it's not a big deal. I've always said, well, it is a big deal. I know he's going to get cap compliant. He has to. It's the rule. He can't be over the cap. But he's going to also have to do a lot of work, whether it's releasing, restructuring, trading, a combination of all three, to be able to give himself some flexibility to be able to bring in somebody in free agency. I don't think that they are going to be in on guys like who's the guy from the Bears? Like, Allen Robinson, right? And things like that. You're not going to see them go after a high-priced free agent, but certainly they need a backup quarterback. So they're going to have to spend money in some form or fashion. So there's holes they are going to have to fill with free agents. They're just not going to be A and maybe not B level free agents.
Right. Well, that's what I say. Like, if you want to bring in a veteran backup quarterback, you have to spend money to do that, which means you're going to have to figure out ways to get so far under that you can add guys like that. I mean, so, if you just
I thought the Eagles were philosophically against paying money for backup quarterbacks, right? so it's kind of ironic that they may have to
no,
do
not
that.
necessarily. I mean, they paid how much? $10 million for Chase Daniel?
Well, that's what I said. They're philosophically against that, as we were told last year when they drafted Jalen Hurts, that they don't want to have high-priced backups anymore. So that's why I said it's ironic that after all that, they may have to spend a few million on a veteran backup.
Right, but to do that, to be able to say, okay, like even if they wanted to bring in like last year they brought in Roby Coleman. That's just like a $1.5 million guy, but you can't even like bring like a depth guy in with the situation they're currently in, right or wrong?
Right. I mean, they have a lot of work to get underneath the cap to a point in which they're flexible enough to even spend some money on one-year veterans that aren't going to cost a lot of money. That is absolutely true. They'll get there. It could be painful along the way, but that's the position that they've been in.
When you say painful along the way, who could that mean? If you say painful along the way,
that's a great, yeah.
If you say painful along the way and you're telling me, well, you might have to get rid of Nate Sudfeld, and you're not going to be able to have Corey Clement, and Richard Rodgers might not be able to come back. Okay, some of those guys have Rodgers had a nice little season. You might like Sudfeld, and you can't have the luxury of having a third quarterback, or maybe he would be your second guy now, but he was your third. But I'm talking about they're going to have some difficult decisions on bigger names than that, right?
Yeah. They will, and I think we'll start to get a little bit more information as we get on here. Some of them are obvious: Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson, Zach Ertz. I mean, Zach Ertz is a nice player. I mean, we may talk about him not being what he was, and that Dallas Goedert's ready to take his place, but ordinarily you would like to have both of those guys, and especially with all the question marks you got at receiver.
Well, people know Ertz's situation. Does that make less likely that a trade and you're just going to have to suck it up and release him?
Maybe. I still think he's a good enough player, and I might be proven wrong on this, but there are a lot of teams that value multiple tight ends in this league. You know, the 49ers do, the Patriots do. There are some I think the Browns under Kevin Stefanski like to have multiple tight ends. There are some other teams out there that will probably be enough of a market where now that you've got a few teams interested, you'll just go to the highest bidder. Now, if you're a team that wants Zach Ertz and you're worried about losing him to another team in free agency, maybe you're willing to give up a higher pick than the other team. But we're not talking about a second round pick, I don't think, or maybe even not a third. So
yeah,
at the end of the day,
John Clayton was on with us. John Clayton was on with us last week. He said,
Seattle, yeah,
Seattle would have interest, but it would have to be for a fourth rounder because they don't even have a first or a third. So if they're going to make a trade, and he said the problem the Eagles are going to have is there's a good free agent market out there, and Ertz makes 8.2. A lot of these teams with the cap going down might not have room for an $8.25 million tight end.
Which is why they might wait on a release and then try to re-sign him to a different structured kind of contract where, yeah, maybe he'll get $8 million, but it's broken up over a few years. Or you trade for him and decide you're going to restructure then and there.
All right, so that's the first that I've really heard that possibly being a possibility. Not that, I mean, it just sounded like this is not happening. They tried to work on a contract last year. They couldn't get it done. It didn't go well. The fact that he would consider restructuring to come back here.
No. I'm sorry. I should have realized I was not articulating that well. I meant he might get traded to a team that doesn't have $8 million to give him this year, but that team might restructure the contract so that the $8 million is spread. Right. He still sees the 8. It's just spread out bookkeeping wise. My fault.
Gotcha. No, okay, that clears the thing up there because obviously I was like, yeah, that's not something that seemed like, hey, I'll come back here and play for that same contract, split it up for me.
No, that's not happening.
No, not happening. So just to kind of give people a little bit of insight, Geoff, on the moves with Deshaun Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey, what does that kind of signify?
Well, it signifies that they need to shed salary, and those guys are, making money and or are veterans. Deshaun is more about, you're only going to save $5 million, but you have to find every bit of million you can save on players that you don't think are part of your current, not just your future, but even your current. And Deshaun is not, and neither is Alshon for the money and for the production. They've obviously tried to replace those guys with younger receivers. And so that's an area where they can say goodbye, move on, and not really feel the sting as much. I mean, they're feeling the sting because, last year's receivers, they weren't great. They were very young, and they played like they were young. And next year, they're not going to be that much older. So you still got a lot of development going on there.
Well, the way I see it, Greg Ward is the most veteran receiver on the roster right now.
That is an accurate statement. He's the most veteran receiver on the roster right now. And to be honest with you, as nice of a story he is, he's just a slot receiver, and he's not an explosive slot receiver. So he's always going to be the kind of guy you're looking to replace. So when that's your most veteran guy at the position, that's never a good situation.
Nope. And again, as I see it, Ward, I mean, unless Marquise Goodwin, I don't know what the deal with his contract is. How's that all work out?
Well, his contract is way too expensive for what, for the value and what they want to do right now. But I sense that if they want him back and he wants to be back, he could probably come back on a restructured deal. He's not going, if he got cut, he's not going to see the $5 or $6 million or whatever the money is that he was going to make from another team. So he's a year older. He didn't play last year because of the opt-out, and he's kind of a one-dimensional type of guy. So, I mean, I don't see him making a ton of money on the free agent market, so he's a guy who could come back on a new deal.
Now, Geoff, there's this stat out there that from 2010 to 2016, every quarterback drafted in the first round is no longer with the team that drafted him. Knowing that, all right, would that kind of shy you away from wanting to take a quarterback with the 6th pick or even trading up? I mean, I've seen a mock draft that has the Eagles moving up to 3 to take Fields. So
what was this? What was the years span that you gave me?
From 10 to 16. Not one of those first-round picks is still on the team that drafted him. When Wentz got traded, every single quarterback drafted in that time frame, none of them are now on the team that drafted him.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to say it's a loaded stat, but it is only a 6-year span. And if you go back to 2010, well, that's 10 years ago from today. So, I mean, it is a position where you'll see movement. Even great quarterbacks like Tom Brady aren't with the team that
Well, he was
drafted
there
him.
for
So
20 years.
he was there, but he's a rare breed. So it's not surprising. I guess 2010 was like Cam Newton years. And, well, when was Matt Ryan drafted? Was he 2009?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, like that's a cherry picked set of years where it just for whatever. It's not like the guys though picked.
It was, I think,
all of them had terrible success.
Yeah, I think it was to coincide with Wentz being that both picks in that draft are gone. The picks in and leading up to like 10.
Sure,
yeah.
sure.
But I mean, it's a pretty big sample size of 6 drafts that not one guy is still with the same team that drafted him. I mean, like to me. This happened when they drafted. I remember when they were talking about trading up to get Wentz, and I was kind of against it. And my point was, these teams chase this ghost that doesn't exist, this franchise quarterback. Like, you are willing to give up. Like, why not find out if Hurts can play? Maybe he can play. Why try to, replace him before you even give him a shot?
I don't know, Mike. I mean, for every stat about what you just give, I can probably say, teams that win Super Bowls, 80% of them have guys who are picked in the top 5 as quarterback.
Well,
other than the Tom Brady.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting stat about. I couldn't believe this that Kansas City was in the Super Bowl this year. They won last year. They had 5 first-round picks on the whole roster.
That's pretty impressive.
And
That's
one of those 5 first-round
to their drafting.
One of those 5 is Sammy Watkins, who really doesn't play all that much. Or it wasn't didn't have a big role.
Right. Especially not for all the money that they paid him. He was supposed to have a bigger role. But, look, I mean, I guess I would say, Mike, I'm just objectively looking at evaluation. If you're a coaching staff and you're starting off, as Nick Sirianni is, you evaluate Jalen Hurts and what you've seen not only in the 4 games that he played, but also you probably go back to college a little bit and see what he did there. And they probably even did that when they were all with the Colts anyway. And then you evaluate this year's crop of quarterbacks. And if in your evaluation, you determine that Justin Fields or Zach Wilson or Trey Lance, any one of those 3, maybe even the other kid from Alabama, whatever, you look at them all. And if you determine that they check out all the boxes more so than what you saw out of Jalen Hurts, then I think you do have to draft a quarterback because that's what new regimes tend to do anyway. I'm all for the whole idea of give Jalen Hurts a chance if indeed he's the guy that they evaluate as just as good as anyone coming out.
Yeah.
But you just have to stick to your evaluation. I think that's the fairest, most objective way to look at it.
This morning, Adam Schefter said on a Philadelphia radio station that, quote, I don't think they're viewing this as a rebuild. This is a league where you win now. I think they'll look at it like, well, move on from some people. That will be addition by subtraction. And so I think that they think they'll be competitive, end quote. Do the Eagles feel that they will be competitive?
I think that they should feel that they can be competitive. Now, we're talking about competitive for Super Bowl next year? No, but I look at it as meaning like you're not going to be terrible. You're going to try to fight to get that last playoff, which now the playoffs are going to be expanded still, right? You get that extra team in. I believe that's still.
I think so. Yeah, 7.
Right. So you've got a shot to continue to look. You're strong in the trenches. I wrote this on InsideTheBirds.com. I think it came out yesterday, right? I said even when you have a question at the quarterback spot, which is always the big point, most teams that are good are very strong in the trenches. And if Brandon Brooks and Lane Johnson come back, and if Jason Kelce comes back, we'll see. That's 3 pretty good linemen. If they come back and stay healthy, that's good. Sam Allo has been a good left guard. We'll see what happens at left tackle, but they have decent options there. And of course, on the other side, you're still going to have Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave, Brandon Graham, most likely Josh Sweat. Yeah, you'll have Josh Sweat and probably going to figure out how to bring back Derek Barnett. That, to me, just like with Washington last year, they were strong on defense. They had some other issues that they had to reconcile, and Alex Smith was able to give them stable quarterback play to be able to win the division. I'm not saying Washington was great, but they were clearly the best team in the division. The Eagles have enough talent to be able to be in games. And if you're trying to build around Jalen Hurts, you don't want to strip it down and try to have him winning games when they're going to be down 24-0 after the first quarter. That's not a good way to grow or evaluate a quarterback. So there's no reason to go Sam Hinkie on this team. The only thing you have to do is make the moves to get under the salary cap, and then try to build up through the draft and sprinkle in free agents.
Yeah, look, I've been saying all along, number one, that offensive line, if they're back and healthy, you got a shot to be a successful offense. That offensive line was a disaster last year, and their offensive line has been pretty good. If you have Brandon Brooks, Lane Johnson, Kelsey Sayamala, and whoever plays left tackle, Dillard or Mailata, that's an offensive line that teams can win with in this league, right? Whether you like that or not.
Absolutely.
So that's why, for me, I can't throw my hands up on the season. But I could ask you to help get myself cap compliant, and competitive and Super Bowl competitive are a little different. Do I try to maximize the value for my, a Fletcher Cox, a Brandon Graham, get value in return while getting cap compliant?
Yes, I think you can. Here's the thing about that, though.
Would they have value?
Maximizing value. I've heard some people say you just got to get rid of anybody over 30 and get what you can get, which is like a Sam Hinkie style of thing. And I say you're never going to get equal value for some of your players who are still good players. They may not be 24 anymore, but Fletcher Cox is still a really good player. I bet you if he got cut right now, 30 teams would be trying to sign Fletcher Cox, right? So no one's going to give up a first-round pick for him, but he's still a valuable player. And if you tried to trade him, you're probably, because of his contract and his age, not going to get more than a third or a fourth-round pick. So if you took, 5 veterans on this team and traded them and got a bunch of fourth, fifth, and sixth-round picks, you're going to be bad. And then the percentage of you being able to replace them with fourth, fifth, and sixth-round picks, which generally, statistically speaking, only have a 10% or worse hit rate to even be a role player, right, in the NFL, not a starter, is not good. There were 7 or 8 guys, Mike, I think, who were over the age of 30 on the Super Bowl team. So they weren't what they used to be, but they were still good, solid players and contributors. You're talking about Malcolm Jenkins, who was very good, actually. But you're talking about Patrick Robinson and LeGarrette Blount and who's the other guy? Corey Graham. Like, they were all players who produced for the team in some sort. Jason Peters was on that team until getting hurt.
Yeah.
So if you really think you can still be competitive next year, and then by 2022, whether it's Jalen Hurts or a quarterback you drafted, you're ready to start to kind of like really become something, then those guys will still be productive players.
I think,
most of them.
It's funny. Somebody's put in here, I would trade up for Trevor Lawrence. Yeah, you and everybody else. That's not happening. Jacksonville,
Sure.
Yeah. Jacksonville's not ready in a position to be like, hey, you know what I want to do? I want to trade out of the number 1 pick and give it to somebody else when I finally got something to go my way. There's no way Jacksonville's trading that pick. So that's out. But what is in?
Why not just trade for Patrick Mahomes? Just see if you can get Pat Mahomes right now.
Right, exactly. Make a call and see if Mahomes is available. Yeah, I would trade up for Trevor Lawrence too. First off, what assets do the Eagles even have to do that? Hey, you want the 6th pick for Trevor Lawrence? Like, no, thank you. I'll keep with what I got. But I certainly would consider getting out of that 6th pick. Somebody texted in earlier, would you trade down and far enough that you could get a pick in next year's draft too? Then you'd have 3 picks next year, possibly in the first round. Like, I don't know where you would have to flip-flop with to say you need to give me your first-round pick next year for me to go to your spot.
Good point. I think that, first of all, you're probably only doing that if someone's moving into 6 because a quarterback is there and the Eagles don't want that
possibility this year.
Right. Very strong possibility. Otherwise, I wouldn't probably move out because I don't want to bypass a positional player who might be really good just to pick up an extra second or a third rounder. You don't get the kind of value you're looking for in a trade down unless someone's giving up future firsts, and that's usually for a quarterback. So, so I wouldn't do it unless. But then, I mean, who would do that? Maybe Denver at 9, or maybe New England. New England might be too low at that point. I don't know if you take a future first to get all the way down to – what's New England draft now, like 15 or 16?
I think 15. Well, what's the difference? If you told me, hey, flip spots with me, right? You go to 6 and I'm going to 15, but you need to give me your pick next year. Now I have my pick next year. Hopefully Indianapolis is next year and that one.
Right. That's
Does
a good
it
point.
matter that New England
well fortified?
Right.
But I would say this: it would really depend on your evaluation of the positional player you were going to take there. Obviously, you're not taking a quarterback. So are you passing on? I'm guessing like Jamar Chase and Penei Sewell aren't there. So now you're talking about maybe passing on a Waddle, passing on Devontae Smith, passing on Micah Parsons, who they would definitely pass on because not. So maybe there's an opportunity for this to go on where they're caught in a spot where the guys who are there on the board that are highest ranked are guys that they feel are probably in that 8 to 12, 15 range anyway, and not top 5. So that all depends on your evaluation.
It's a good conversation because you just said Parsons, and then you kind of poo-pooed that they would even consider him, which I found interesting because, look, you mentioned something that Roseman did and doesn't get a lot of credit for was he hit on a lot of guys, and a lot of people say, well, that wasn't him. That was Joe Douglas. He was the one that brought in LeGarrette Blount and Alshon Jeffrey and these veteran players. So that's a blueprint that they can't really follow again this year.
Yeah, no, they're. I mean, you're gonna probably have to just shore up holes with some guys, but it's not like you're trying to find those 1-year veterans to round out a team to help you win a Super Bowl. I mean, yeah.
And people keep asking, why does Roseman keep getting chance after chance? And somebody said the other day, like, he's supposed to be so good with the cap. Why are they in this cap situation? Well, number one, I will say when you lose a player of Wentz's ilk, that's a big crusher. But number two, I think he had plans to get out of this problem, but didn't have plans for the salary cap to drop because of the pandemic.
Of course.
So how much did the salary cap drop because of that?
Well, that obviously is an issue of why they are. They were going to be over the cap even if the cap was normally right.
But I think they probably
have to extend themselves as much.
I think they probably planned, hey, we're going to be over, but the cap's not going to be 180. It might be 192. And instead, because of this, you've lost $10, $15 million that you thought was going to be on your side.
Right. So what Howie does that's different, and a couple of teams do this. I think the Saints do it as well. I forget who else, but they don't mind.
Yeah, Mickey Loomis, very much like a Howie Roseman.
Right. They don't mind doing the dummy years thing where they know that the player may not be on the roster like 3 or 4 years, but there is still some dead money. It's usually just not a lot of dead money. And then as the cap goes up every year, that percentage that the dead money is taking up of your cap is lower and lower. But a lot of teams, Andrew Brandt has talked to us about this a lot on Inside the Birds. A lot of teams just want your cap and your cash to match every year. And when you do that, you safeguard against things that you can't control, like a pandemic or like anything that would decrease the salary cap, which never happens, but now it happens.
And
that's
I think it was Joe Banner on Inside the Birds that said the Eagles went very rogue in terms of what the Eagles would do because they won the Super Bowl and said, let's go for it. And instead of following their principles, they kind of strayed from that and did things that they wouldn't normally do, which has put them into a little bit of a predicament coupled with a pandemic.
Yeah, and see that's the part that I kind of look at it with a little side eye, because if you remember, it was this time last year at the Combine that Howie said, look, we know, and this is coming off the playoff, when they make the run, they get into the playoffs, lose to Seattle. He goes, we know we have to turn over this roster. We know we have to make moves, and we can't just be fooled by the fact that we made the playoffs. And hope is not a strategy. But then when the pandemic, after this last year, he's like, well, then the pandemic happened, and we're supposed to be at an advantage because we have the same head coach and quarterback, so we reverse course. It's like, but their moves I'm sorry, but you got to stick to your principles. You had the right idea at first, and then you change.
Yeah, but Jeff, their moves in the offseason suggested that they thought they were ready. I mean, they went and got Slay. They went out and got Marquise Goodwin, and they thought, like, hey, that's the veteran receiver that give us, they made moves for veteran.
I wouldn't call Marquise Goodwin this. I think that they really did not pad the wide receiver position as well as they could have because they didn't want to do it, because they were trying to get younger. I mean, you needed a cornerback, and you still want to compete. So you were able to get Slay for a third and a fifth, and the money wasn't. That was a good bargain for them, but they didn't really make it wasn't like trading for Michael Bennett the year before where you're like, oh yeah, I'm bringing in a 3-time a pass rusher, and that's part of the defensive line that we already have. We're just adding to it, even though we may not need it.
Yeah.
So I feel like they were on the right track to getting younger and flipping the roster. And then they're caving to Jason Peters' demands like 3 months later. And I'm like, wait a minute.
I think they felt like we're there, we're not there. Maybe we are there.
You can't be that way. I know it's easy for you and I to say. You got to have a principle and you have to stick to it, and you have to realize that you can win a Super Bowl and being weak at certain positions or rebuilding at certain positions, or you can at least compete for it when you're trying to flip certain positions over. That's the way the world works.
All right, we'll have to end it there. We'll have more, obviously, tomorrow. We're going to get into some draft stuff with Andrew, get his thoughts on 6, what's going to be in that spot, better to move down. He's the man to talk to about that. Adam Kaplan will have more on the offseason on Friday. Inside the Birds drops tomorrow morning at 6, and you had the debut of your new show.
That's right. Well, it's going to debut next week. We had them on Inside the Birds TV. I'm talking about former Eagles Jason Avant and Quentin Michael. They were on the latest ITB TV, which is available on our YouTube and podcast platforms. And then next week, Wednesday, 6 a.m., their first show will drop. I disappear. I'm not part of it. I'm just behind the scenes. It's just going to be Jason and Quentin talking Eagles and breaking down everything that they do. And they do it really well, and it's going to be an awesome show.
Jason's great. I've had Michael on the show before, but Jason I've met in person. We've talked through text a lot. He's been on the show a lot. Avant's fantastic. Michael was always very well spoken and broke down the game when he was a player. I'm sure that show will be must. Is it watch or listen? Is it both?
Both. You can either watch it on YouTube or listen to it on the podcast. You like the name? You like Q&A? That's a pretty good name, right?
Yeah, it's very clever. Q&A. I like that.
Q&A.
Quentin and Avant. I picked it up, right?
You got it. It didn't go over your head.
No, it didn't, man. Geoff Mosher. Inside the Birds. The podcast drops tomorrow at 6 a.m., and he, like August, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Thanks, Geoff.
You got it, brother.
All right, we got plenty more. Don't forget Football at 4. It's brought to you by Dr. Lyle M. Back. For everything from skincare to cosmetic surgery, go to iloveLyleBack.com. 856 Makeover for Dr. Lyle M. Back. Proud sponsor of Football at 4.